Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar, Water in Focus, where we'll be focusing on the EU corporate reporting policy and creating a water-secure future. We have an excellent panel for you today who will be discussing this topic, but I'll just kick the discussion off with a short presentation about CDSB and some of our work in this space. Just to introduce you to our organization, CDSB is an organization that was set up as a consortium of business and environmental NGOs to provide decision-useful environmental information to markets via the mainstream corporate report. We do this by providing a framework, the Cdsb Framework, which is on our next slide, that really helps organizations with how to integrate environmental information, including water-related information, into the annual reports of businesses. It builds on existing reporting standards and approaches, such as the CDP questionnaire and others, and brings in the financial reporting world's learnings, the principles of how to report high-quality decision-useful information into one document to help companies with integrating environmental information into their annual reporting. With that in mind, our focus is around the EU and the policy landscape across the Union. The point to make here is that there is a plethora of policy initiatives that exist across Europe that either focus specifically on water, or on the next slide, have water as part of their DNA. Water touches across all aspects of business. If you have employees, then they need water. If you're producing something, you need water. No matter what type of business you are, you might have some dependency on water. There are, and so therefore, it is dotted across EU policies. However, water, it doesn't have a biodiversity strategy, for example, equivalent that covers areas, so it is often not in focus. The result is that water is often not properly valued in investments, and it is also a very unique area where it needs different type of attention at the local and sort of multi-level or multinational level as well. All of this results in an overall challenge in fostering investments towards a water secure future, both in terms of return on investment, but also to secure that sort of water resilient future for generations to come. At the same time, water is material. You cannot open a newspaper and see without seeing some sort of relation to water scarcity, too much water, too little water, the quality of water, and businesses have, of course, had many sort of issues with water across the decades. So it is a material issue, but it is not properly valued and understood across corporates and their reporting as well. So to help with this, CDSB has produced further guidance to its framework, which is on our next slide, that really helps bring a bit more detail into how to integrate water-related information into your annual report. And this is available on cdsb.net/water. This takes the principles and requirements of the CDSB framework and really applies it more specifically to the topic of water. On the next slide, we have a little screenshot of the inside. We try to make it as visually appealing and helpful and usable for a reporting practitioner when they are working through the application of water-related disclosures in their mainstream report and their management report. So with that short introduction, I will hand over to Bianca Nyhof, who is the Managing Director of the Netherlands Water Partnership. Many of you might know her from her various other roles in the past. She has been very active in this space around biodiversity, and now she's managing a wonderful organization that really is the first port of call for many organizations looking to engage more in the Dutch water sector as well. So Bianca, with that, I'll hand over to you to chair the discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Michael. Thank you for having me here as your moderator for this morning. And thank you for the wonderful introduction on water and the importance of water. And yes, I'm very happy to now be able to work in the field of water. It's central to everything we do, as you indicated. And maybe to add to what you said, a lot of people don't realize that 70% of the global water use is actually used for producing our food. And if you see how we as a global population, there's many more of us in the years to come, we still have to feed everybody. So we have a huge challenge there. And the other one really right at hand is the challenge of we asking everybody to wash their hands to protect them from contracting COVID-19. But if you don't even have drinking water, well, there's many more things how water is indeed impacting our lives. So very happy to be working on that with the Netherlands Water Partnership and actually bringing the knowledge and expertise we as the Dutch have, supporting others having those challenges, facing challenges related to water in trying to solve them and in that way do our contribution. I'm very happy today we're talking on water on an EU level as well and what's happening there and how businesses can bear in mind more how water is impacting their business and the different tools and mechanisms which are being developed here, one of them being by Cdsb. But many more things going on, and this is what we want to educate you all about, and actually also ask you to join in the conversation. So let me invite you herewith to put your questions in the chat, and we will try and kind of feed them into the discussion we are going to have. I'm very pleased with the panelists we have today. Let me shortly introduce you to them, and then start with the first round of questions. We have Kathleen Dominique, Program Lead Financing Water within the OECD. We have Mirjam Wolfram, Director of Policy Engagement, CDP Europe, and you are now a member of the EFRAG Project Task Force on reporting on non-financial risks and opportunities and linkage to the business model. You're now also providing support to the Project Task Force on the EU Sustainability Reporting Standards. A mouthful, but thank you for being here today. And obviously, Francesca Recanati, Senior Technical Manager, CDSB. Thank you all three of you for joining me in this panel. And let me kick off with you, Kathleen. Can you give us a brief description of the OECD work on the Roundtable on Financing Water, which you had recently?
Yeah, thank you, Bianca, and hello everyone. Very good to be with you here on this important topic. At the OECD, we have a program of work on financing water that looks at a range of issues, and to date, we've really focused, I would say, more on how to mobilize additional finance to invest in water security. But what we've been building out more recently is trying to look at the other side of that issue, which is how water-related risk can be financially material for the financial sector. This is a very new topic for us, and I think it's a new topic for many people. I think it's a very important one to explore, especially with the developments like the TCFD. The big question I think that we hear from the investors and financiers that we engage with is trying to understand exactly connecting the dots between the impacts that we see, which are very real and evident on societies, economies, and communities, and trying to understand the channels of transmission to how those can create impacts in the financial sector. There are a number of potential ways that can happen, but trying to figure out what exactly is financially material is very important. So indeed, Bianca, you mentioned the Roundtable on Financing Water, which is a dedicated platform that we have that engages the water community and the finance community on these types of issues. And we had a very interesting panel in our latest meeting, which happened a couple of weeks ago and focused on how water security contributes to climate action, exactly exploring these topics. And so it is something that's rising up on the agenda, but it's still something we don't have a huge amount of analysis about yet.
And maybe just a follow-up question, which immediately comes to my mind is, why is that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, one thing that we've pointed to, we put together a short framing paper that we've been working on to scan this issue and try to understand the state of play. And one thing that came out of that research was that an observation that we are calling a materiality gap. And what do we mean by that? We're talking about the substantial economic impact of water-related risks, which are very well documented and rising. Michael said that, he highlighted some of the headlines that we all see, we all read about. But there can be a gap between those types of impacts and the financial materiality in the global financial system. And we spotlighted 3 areas where we think can help explain that gap. The first is that the evidence and analysis on financial materiality of those risks remain patchy. So we see some reports, some studies, some credit rating agencies, some NGOs doing some work, some academics doing some work, but it's still, much more, doesn't provide a comprehensive view. Also, we know that current approaches to risk modeling and risk assessment do not capture all kinds of risks, including water risks, and when they are covered, they're not necessarily fully priced. And so this, in fact, can mask certain risks and their potential impact on the financial sector, leaving regulators and institutions unprepared. So this question of how we model the data we have, that can provide a bit of a blind spot. So that's one reason. The second is that when you really look at what financial materiality means, this is very much defined by current prudential regulations for the financial sector. And we know these do not contain explicit mention of environmental risks. So we have to acknowledge that financial institutions are operating in a broader regulatory environment, and that can often mean that those types of risks are not considered material. Finally, and this is the third point, is where financially material risks arise, the financial sector has tools to deal with them. That can be risk hedging or risk transfer tools, which can also reduce the perception of financial materiality in the system. So those are a couple of reasons why we think, in fact, there is this gap, and why some of those very real risks and impacts may be masked in terms of their financial materiality, at least at this stage.
Thank you. Very interesting. And let me first, because there's another question I have for you later on when it comes down to policy, but I first would like to move to you, Miriam. You're Director of Policy Engagement, CDP Europe, been working on a lot of reporting non-financial risk opportunities and linkages to business modeling. Business case for water, what is that one like from your perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Bianca, and hello everyone from my side as well. We have already heard now quite nicely framed that water security and water issues are really critical to society, of course, and also to economy, and to really actual businesses, right? Whose business models depend on clean water and also water security in a sense that there is enough water, but also not too much in terms of droughts, which then creates financial risks. So the business case for water is then hopefully clear, and from CDP side, of course, we can maybe bring some interesting numbers also to illustrate this a little bit more. So CDP uses transparency and accountability to generate insights and to drive ambitious action on water security at scale throughout various sectors of the economy. And by requesting this water-related information on behalf of the investor signatories, CDP helps investors, companies, and governments to protect fresh water resources globally, so we can hopefully achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but also all these elements and policies in the European Union under the European Green Deal. And Cathy has already sort of mentioned the importance of the financial sector towards this. But I'd like to start indeed with how we understand, or how we basically try to map the business case for water and to communicate this to companies themselves, but also to their main stakeholders, the investors who actually can enact through finance better water management. I have some numbers for you, which are still based on 2020 data, since we're still sort of running the analysis of the 2021 data. And we see that the combined value of water risks reported in 2020 hit a new record. That was $336 billion globally, with almost 31% of the risk anticipated to hit within the next 3 years. Businesses and their operations are really exposed to disruptions and other risks from increased water-related disasters. Mike mentioned already that we have, of course, witnessed terrible floods and other extreme weather events. Around 74% of all natural disasters between 2001 and 2018 were water-related. So during the last 20 years, we have witnessed floods and droughts with catastrophic impacts, thousands of deaths. When we look at the societal impact of when water is not sort of taken into account on our joint journey towards sustainability, but also creating almost $700 billion in economic damage. So what we sort of see concretely is that we need ultimately really better corporate water disclosure and governance by corporates. Our questionnaires guide companies through an assessment of water risks and impacts, trying to sort of help companies to enhance their management of risks in their operations, but also critically improving their supply chain resilience, but also to manage the impacts in supply chains, since water is really a very local issue and it needs to be looked at really from that global perspective of companies. So we see that from some numbers that transparency on corporate environmental action is really a key driver to transitioning business models, including entire supply chains towards sustainability, and to track progress against water-related company targets, which ultimately should obviously be measurable against our global environmental and sustainability targets. So the business case, I think, is clear when we look at these numbers, and I can bring some further statistics later on.
Maybe one follow-up question, because you indicated there's a lot of risks and we can do risk mitigation actually, but I guess there's a lot of opportunities as well. So approaching it from the positive side.
Absolutely. We see also that, of course, like what we often see actually in the disclosure of companies is that as much or often the same sort of risks identified by the company, and this is true for water as it's true also for other environmental issues such as climate change or deforestation. When we look at regulatory risk or transition risk, often what is identified as a risk by the companies is equally identified as an opportunity, provided that the company actually integrates it into its strategy and business model and puts the right measures in place to really turn a risk into an opportunity. And that often, of course, the theory of change of our work is really to bring that back to the capacity of companies to get access to first communicate that information to their investors, but also then to basically have better access to financing based on their better management of water-related risks and opportunities. You're right.
Yeah, no, thank you for adding that. I'm an optimist by nature, so I always like to think of the positive side of things and the opportunities we have, although indeed there's a lot of risks involved as well. Thank you. I would like to move to Francesca. Francesca, the Senior Technical Manager within CDSB, and we heard an introduction from your colleague already a little bit on what CDSB is doing, and maybe you want to elaborate on that, but let me also ask you a question like, what are you're kind of the translator between investors and also businesses. So what are the main challenges there in preparing effective water disclosure to investors, and how do the existing best practices, what do they, or good practices, whatever you want to call them, what do they look like?
Yes, thanks, Bianca, and thanks for the great interventions before that already provided a very, very useful context. So yes, so basically, at CDSB, as Mike introduced, we published this what we call water guidance. So starting from the Cdsb framework, basically it's like a practical layer added to the framework, including specific say reporting element and aspects and details like that are specific for water. So what we tried to do with this guidance is actually to gather all the resources that are already available, and there are a lot, and also to maybe provide like useful detail to navigate a bit better the water world. So the water issues, for example, as since Kathleen was mentioning, the like often water-related risks are not even like considered in risk assessment. So what we tried to do is to, for example, provide a list of which are these water-related risks and opportunities too, with some examples and implications to the business. So of course, these are generic examples, but if like they can guide risk assessments, for example. And within this guidance, so we refer to some of the requirements of the CDSB framework. So just to name a few: governance, risks and opportunities, management of water policies and target, and metrics and future outlook. And for each of these requirements, we provide guidance, a box with a link to existing useful resources. So it works also as a collector of like existing resources, and some good practices from existing mainstream reports or annual reports from companies. Well, so just to move it to your next like kind of aspect that you mentioned, so challenges. So basically, of course, the challenges in preparing this kind of reports are very much linked to some of the aspects that were mentioned before, for example, site specificity that Miriam mentioned before, and also understanding why water is material for a company, so mentioned by Catherine. So like, to briefly summarize, so basically, so water is a complex issue, so it's multifaceted. So we have issue related to water quantity, issue related to water pollution, for example, or quality. Again, it's site-specific and linked to other environmental topics too. So to climate change, to land use change, to biodiversity. And often, as again, Miriam mentioned, it's often required to adopt a supply or value chain to have a comprehensive understanding of the risks for a company. And last but not least, it also required to engage with other, like not only value chain, but other stakeholders operating in the same areas to manage water. So these are kind of challenges that like maybe differentiate a bit water, for example, from climate, that like you like the first thing is reducing your emissions. With water, you have to consider where you are, for example, consuming your water, what's the status of water in that specific area. So this, of course, adds a layer of challenge when analyzing, assessing water, managing it, and also preparing the information to be disclosed, because like you have to add, again, some details to this disclosure. So all these water characteristics, of course, affect, again, water management within a company and the selection and prioritization of information to be disclosed. So, so the good practices that we have seen with our research, so they basically do, so the best thing, so when really the best practices among the good practices, they always clarify the interaction between the specific business and water. Like when I say interaction, I mean dependencies and impacts. And often this is included in the description of business model, for example. So like you open the report and you just, okay, water is there, it's important. And these, of course, clarifies why water is material, even if there are not many details, I have to say, but at least with, okay, water is important for the business. And of course, this sets like a nice context for the water policies and targets that they define and explain later on. And of course, they then provide some information on key metrics, and the best ones have also some time series. So you see like some historical like time series, and these are, in the best case, referred to targets, because this is why we want to see some metrics, because you have target and we want to understand. Last is governance. So they clarify where the responsibilities are in the board and the management. So like if there is a water committee or someone in the board that is responsible for water. And of course, all these elements are connected. So you see the connection between like from risk assessment to performance. And yeah, I have to say one thing that, like things was mentioned before, opportunities are still not very much disclosed. So it's like there is a focus on risk, often maybe under climate change, but opportunities are yet not well disclosed yet. So yeah.
Well, thank you, Francesca. And maybe one question which I saw in our chat as well. There was an ask for specific tools. I remember that in the guidance you have written, there are a couple of tools mentioned. So if you would like to pick like 2 examples, one on the location side of things, but also the governance, I think is an important aspect which makes water special.
Yeah, so definitely. So like, first of all, I would say that, like, we of course mention other reporting standards and frameworks. So for example, CDP questionnaire, GRI, that really are useful because they guide also like companies to prepare this information. So this is like generally to how to start and like approach water. So as I said, like site specificity is very important to understand water risks and so on. So some of the tools, I can mention 2. So there is the WRI aqueduct tool and the WWF water risk filter tool. So basically, if you open those tools, you have maps, and what they do is to classify basically different areas. So you can have from water basin to country in terms of water risks. So of course, then you are, different types of risk aggregated, and you also go and check some disaggregated, so sub levels, so focusing on physical risks, for example. Yeah, on the governance, I have to say it's a bit more challenging, but so there are some sectoral guidance from the mining sectors, I think from Australia and Canada. And also there is one from PRI. It's a bit outdated, but it's very good because they show the importance of engaging with stakeholders too. So that's the main thing. And of course, one thing is like, of course, all the guidance on governance, reports and guidance on governance that you find on climate also applies to water to a certain extent. So like involving the board, involving the management. So yeah, so that for water specifically, there are a couple of very good sector specific guidance. Yeah, mining and extraction too. But yeah, I think so.
Well, thanks. Now that's making it tangible, I think in many ways. Talking about making it tangible, just popped to my mind that in 2023, we will have the first global water conference on valuing water again. So it's after 40 years, the first global conference on water again, with the theme valuing water. So the value of water, I think we all know the value of water now, is considering what has happened in the last couple of years, but I think it's a tremendous opportunity. And we are talking here about linking policymakers, corporates, financial institutions, linking them all around something which has to do with value as well, financial material, water risks. So back to you, Kathleen. Why are those linkages so important? And maybe on a side note, we should probably use that conference as something to work towards to bring this really to the table, because we have an opportunity here talking about opportunities.
Absolutely. I mean, great question, and great to also, set that milestone of 2023, I think, which, the water community is really looking towards. I hope financing is high on the agenda there. I think that would be really exciting, and also broadening out sort of the audience for that conference to the financial sector and investors as well. I think that's a very powerful signal also for governments, that there's a real demand for policy action, demand for concerted action that can mobilize finance in that direction. Maybe coming back a little bit more to this topic about the linkages, why does these linkages between financial materiality and water risk matter? And from our perspective, those issues are really topical for both policymakers and financial institutions, and they really require more investigation. So that's a key takeaway. For financial regulators, the issue is that material financial risks that may be masked today, that are not well understood, that are not captured in modeling, it's not captured in the data, could mean that when those risks materialize, the financial sector may not be equipped to deal with them. I think that's really important to think about. And in fact, I just saw something from the Federal Reserve of the US put out a day or so ago, with a warning that says, climate risks are coming and they can change asset prices very quickly. So if you're not ready, that can result in a major impact. So I think that's a great warning sign. That's why that's so important, I think, for the financial sector side. Also, we know that if and when some water-related risks are considered financially material for the financial system, that could impact the allocation of financial flows. And I think that's behind the theory of change, of trying to understand this situation better, is reallocating capital where it's exposed to those types of risks towards financing activities and infrastructure that contribute to water security and don't undermine it. So that's that. And then just the third point, I think it puts a spotlight on policymakers and the fact that developing publicly available information and evidence and data around the linkages, where water risks are happening, how they're changing due to climate change and other factors, what that means in terms of impacts on the economy and societies, and what that means in terms of financial impacts is extremely important. And I might just add a little statement at the end there, is that, I put that emphasis on publicly available information, because one thing we could expect or could happen, that's a speculation, but could happen, is that as these issues gain attention in the financial system, there will be more and more proprietary private efforts to try to document and assess that kind of data and how they assess risk, but that likely won't be disclosed in the public domain. So I think, again, that's an important topic for governments to have on their agendas, that's something that's extremely important for all of us to be able to make proper decisions to deal with those risks.
I remember, actually, I think it was already a year ago, and sorry for not knowing the number, but that was the Dutch National Bank who actually looked at a portfolio of investments, and they indicated the risks. They actually were surprised to find the amount of risks related to water and climate change related risks, and within that portfolio, which they were not aware. And maybe a simple example of that is when we had the droughts starting in 2018 in the Netherlands. We all of a sudden had a shortage of gasoline. Well, what does drought have to do with gasoline? But it was simply because we couldn't transport on the rivers, on the ships, the gasoline anymore. And because of that, was impacting the economy. So it's also always those indirect relations, I think, which are very important. And knowing indeed, as you say, what is the risk involved, and that it's masked, as I like that word which you used. Francesca, I see you raise your hand, so probably there's something you want to add to that.
Yeah, just a quick comment on this. So, I think it's linked both, also to what you were saying, Bianca. I'm thinking about at the EU level. So back in my academic experience, so EU has a lot of data and models also to make scenarios. They are not user-friendly, I have to say. So when I have to use this data model, I have to do a lot of pre-process. It was months of work. But as you said, Bianca, it's sometimes it's not creating this data, but it's making them accessible to companies or maybe less technical people. So yeah, just wanted to comment on this.
Mayam, back to you, maybe. So there's a lot of opportunities within the EU as well on corporate reporting governance rules, and maybe the EU even showing how it could be done. Anything to add from that? How does CDP Europe specifically contribute to that?
Yes, indeed. Obviously, a very interesting regulatory framework coming up with corporate reporting rules to be substantially improved from my perspective, from CDP Europe's perspective, including not only on the disclosure requirements, but also on the governance. If you allow me, Bianca, because I think I got really inspired by the discussion, and I would just also like to highlight another piece for the financial sector and why this is so important. I think there is definitely, as we heard already from Kathleen and from Francesca, a gap, and we actually hope that this gap will be closed in the European Union also through the regulatory framework, where I'm happy to then also say some more words later on. But indeed, I think what we really see is the key part is that water disclosures from companies are not yet at the same level in terms of the quantity of companies and the quality also of the reporting that it is as for climate change, so emissions. It's also just showing that we do have a topic here which we do not have the full understanding on the corporate side. It's not yet really mature as it is for emissions, and it's really a key area to tackle, and it's more complex because it has all these interlinkages, as you had a good example on, right? So the impacts of climate change on water and so forth. The responsible water management is profitable. We talked about opportunities. I just found another another number for the business opportunity side, which is very important to highlight as well, which is significant. So we have also companies that reported business opportunities of a value of $711 billion. So this is even more than on the risk side. And we also had an independent research from the McGill University and consultancy firm Milani that found that companies that disclosed through CDP ranked 19 percentiles better than the average business in their ability to access capital. And I think this is really crucial because we know that financial institutions such as bank and institutional investors can offer companies these systemic incentives mentioned by Kathleen for change by ensuring that investment and lending practices are fit for eliminating pollution. They take all of these issues into account. Yet we also found in a recent survey that water issues within the financial sector, or the awareness within the financial sector, is comparably low. So while 70% of reporting financial institutions regard climate change as an important issue for their institution, this drops to 22% for water. So I think that's just also underpinning the points that have already been made. And if I may just give one concrete example how CDP now also acts on this gap in our work with financial institutions who are really vital to water, together with the Water Footprint Network, Mercer, and with support from the Dutch Valuing Water Initiative. CDP is engaging the financial sector to develop the first ever set of water security reporting metrics for financial institutions. So this is really for us kind of the concrete next step to create transparency within the financial services sector itself and to help these financial companies to understand. So they will be requested to report annually against these water metrics as of next year. And we hope that we will then also contribute with another piece of the puzzle towards a better understanding of water issues within the financial sector, which then will hopefully help them to take better investment decisions and so forth.
Thank you, Miriam. Very interesting. And actually, I like the numbers that there's more opportunities than risks. Actually, it makes me.
You're very right to always point out the opportunity side as well, because it is.
People are more inclined to work on things which bring a perspective and which are nice to work on. So let's try and capture them. Very good to know that the work being done on the understanding within the financial institutions of the water risks actually and opportunities which are obviously there. Francesca, CDSB is working on that connection. Is there anything you would like to state where really there's the biggest challenge you still see and maybe you're working on it already as CDSB?
Well, so yeah, I don't know. I think the first, one of the main challenges is to really understand that water is a, let's say, sector-specific issues or activity-specific issues, but is also this geographical specificity or site specificity is very important. And I do understand from a company perspective that it requires effort, but of course, with gradual step, you can then assess the different location of your operation, of your suppliers, and of course, using the tools that are available, you can really have support on this side, even technical support. So I think that this is really the first, it's not a challenge, it's just like to accept these and move on. The other challenge that it's, again, technical is on future outlook and scenario analysis, because this requires a combination of different also aspects and models like climate, for example, or land use change. So this is very hard. So again, the tools I mentioned before, so WRI tool and WWF tool, provide some scenarios. So you can see some projections in the future, but of course they are based mainly on climate models, and they include also some socioeconomic models. But again, this site specificity of water comes back, and like the governance aspects are hard to be included at a global level in a model. So then when you are going to assess your, let's say, interaction with water in a specific location, you also have to check how is water governance like, or yeah, like what the regulators are doing on water. And this can go from municipality to wider region like EU. So this is again another challenge. But yeah, so I think there are some even like technical improvement, but also as Miriam was mentioning, also from the investor side, I see that the like interest in water is increasing. So this is really promising. Just one thing, like again, it's a positive I want to be I wanted to see the positive like role that companies can have. So if companies disclose not only metrics, but also like adequate narrative explaining those metrics, this can also kind of contribute to the education of investors. And I'm just underlining this because it's important, again, to be able to compare and to benchmark between companies. But again, with water, it's important to explain and provide a narrative, again, due to these like stakeholder engagement, site specificity. So it's, yeah, I just wanted to point this out. And I hope this contributes also to investors, improving on water knowledge.
Yeah, well, if I even refer back to my daily work with Netherlands Water Partnership, when we are talking about investing in projects and understanding between investors and the ones running the projects, actually. So it's the understanding of the water risk. So I think it's very good to have the story around it as well, to take people along and unmask or unreveal actually where the challenges are, making them understand the relationships. So one of the questions, and maybe directed to you, Miriam, some best practice examples for corporates really in terms of disclosing the water risks and the management. Is there something, and I hope you're the right person to ask this question, is there who is like the leader in doing that?
It's a very good question. It's always that's also what I think we want to promote, right? The learning from best practice examples. Maybe also Francesca, feel free to chip in if you have a good case study that you'd like to present. I wouldn't be able to now point out to one specific company, but there are definitely key themes that we see coming through, which is and obviously there's a lot of best practice studies available with CDSB and CDP. But what we really need to see for water is that strong integration into the business strategy, also into the governance. So when it comes down to the actual implementation and the on-the-ground implementation of water management within a company, we also see where companies have actually also water expertise on their board, or at least sustainability expertise, where this can be then also find its home, so to say. The engagement throughout value chains, specifically also supply chains, really to work with entire networks and to integrate also really external expertise, I think is also a key element for water issues, since there are still elements missing. And then ultimately, also really to have this strongly built into the risks and water assessment of a company at large, where it's again, the complexity water sits in pollution. It's also very sector specific. Of course, if my business is dependent on clean water, then this is my major risk. As if I have a factory on a site next to the sea, and we know that sea levels rise, and in 5 years the factory is flooded, then I have a clearly an asset that I will lose, and these kind of things. That this is kind of the key themes that are really critical for water.
I kind of think you kind of in between the lines said something very important, which is if there's a senior person within the organization also being aware of the water risks. I think that's a vital point, actually. And if this topic is picked up within an organization, that's usually also the case. Either you have on like the lower level within the organization, really some people picking it up very actively and promoting it, but in the end, somebody in the board or close to the board has to see that it is of importance. I think that's what you were saying as well. Francesca, any example, best practice to add?
Yeah, there, I just wanted to add, like, so like very much link like to what Miriam said, like I can point out some sectors, like, I don't know, beverage sector, agri-food sector, or mining sector, but because for them, water is really, so with no water, they cannot operate. So they are working on water since years, and now they really are, they built awareness, they are like promoters of water stewardship. So really those kind of sectors, and for specific names, I mean, you can check the different resources again, like the results of CDP or ratings or questionnaires, and like Cdsb Framework, Cdsb water guidance also includes some good examples. But those sectors, I mean, those sectors that really depend on water, so with no water, no operations. Yeah, so these are among the best practices, I would say.
Kathleen, drawing you into the conversation again, I guess from the OECD, you see some wonderful things happening probably as well. So what is a good example you would like to share where it's really happening?
Yeah, well, maybe I would say, I think the awareness is definitely raising, for sure. That's an extremely good sign. And of course, at OECD, we work with governments. And so what we see is more and more governments taking an active role on this agenda around financing water. And I think that's a very positive sign. Maybe coming back to some of the points I raised earlier, for example, we've seen interesting developments, to cite one example, in the US, where President Biden issued an executive order in May of this year around the requirement for the US government to disclose financially relevant climate-related risks. And so that has started a process of thinking, throughout the US government and various government departments around what does climate-related risks mean for us. And just to give maybe one very salient illustration, again, this is very early days, that only came out in May. But for example, we had a speaker from the Office of Management and Budget at the Roundtable on Financing Water a couple of weeks ago, and he said he's actually in charge of managing a federal loan program and federal loan guarantee program, which has a huge impact on the housing market in the US. And in fact, to give you a sense of scale, the scale of those loans is something of between like $4 and $5 trillion. It's massive, right? And so part of his charge is to think about, well, okay, if we're underwriting loans or guaranteeing loans for homes in the US, mortgages tend to be very long, up to 30 years. What do climate-related risks maybe mean in terms of risk for my loan portfolio over 30 years? And if you try to think through the implications, that could potentially be massive. Of course, we don't know exactly how that will factor in. The analysis needs to be done. There's a lot of decision making that needs to be made to make those risks more visible. But I think that's a really interesting and tangible example of something a government is doing to try to unmask, if you will, or try to shine a spotlight on some areas within the financial system where there may be blind spots. So I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but I think that's a very good illustration of the potential size and scale of issues. We recall, of course, a global financial crisis over a decade ago was originated in subprime lending in the US housing market. And then we understand sort of how the interconnections of the financial system and the global financial market can create massive impacts across economies all over the world. I'm not saying that will reproduce itself, but just it's one example of trying to better understand actual risks in those kinds of financial activities.
I was actually, related to what you were saying, I was thinking of the TCFD, the TNFD, like the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, the one for nature, natural capital, nature. Should we think of a TWFD? It doesn't maybe kind of, you can't say it so nicely, but still, is that something to work on? There's a lot of, like, I think more than 90% of climate-related events have something to do with water. And also because of it being so location-specific, availability in different locations becoming different. So there's a risk for business continuity. If business have to move, there's a huge financial implication. Should we work towards a TWFD?
Bianca, if I can, I have a quick thought on that. In fact, I have a little bit of a divided view. On the one hand, I think it's really important that water becomes more visible, and sort of putting it front and center, sort of not sort of subservient or buried under sort of nature generally or physical climate risk generally. But at the same time, there's a risk to sort of single out water as its own thing, its own room, its own discussion, where in fact it's so cross-cutting. We all know that. Anyone working on water understands that complexity and the cross-cutting nature. I would actually probably push a little bit more to make water more explicit in the TCFD, which investors are paying attention to, and also the TNFD. Obviously, that's very new. And one way we're trying to do that, and just to give you an example, is we have the OECD is organizing a major event this week. It's called the Forum on Green Finance and Investment, and it attracts very senior government officials, financial regulators, financial institutions, investors. There are sessions over many days, and we will organize a session tomorrow looking at physical climate risks and financial materiality. So it's what we're talking about today, but we're using water risks as a way to illustrate that. So that's a way to say, this is something very important, actually, that's already on your agendas, and let us show you how water is an important part of it. So that's a strategy. And I think that might be an even more practical strategy, because you don't have to sort of bring yet another topic onto investors' agendas. You say, that topic's already there. Let us explain how water is really important of what you're already working on.
Yeah, wonderful. I like it, actually. So thank you for pushing back on that one. It was just a wild thought.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Miriam, back to you. There's a question in the chat, which is on the CSRD, the Corporate Social Responsibility Directive. Does it have better water-related disclosure requirements? What's your opinion on it?
I do have an opinion on the, the draft Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive is significantly stronger than the previous non-financial reporting directive across many areas. So there's not only more disclosure requirements, or let's say the wording is significantly enhanced about what is the objective. So really sort of around the key elements, disclosures on strategy, business model, governance, policies, risks, opportunities, targets, performance measures. There is a very specific link to when it comes to climate, to corporates reporting requirements on their plans to align with 1.5. There's no such 1.5 for water, no for nature, right? I mean, for nature we have a full recovery by 2050 and in intermediate steps. From that perspective, one could argue that it could be more significantly pointing to water. Here the wording remains more largely, but also the directive covers all sustainability topics. So I think it was also more like a judgment call. I think generally speaking, what is important to look into the context. So obviously the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive is sort of the key reporting rules for companies, but within these rules will sit the EU Sustainability Reporting Standards. And here there will be a standard specifically on water and marine resources. So there will be that specificity as regards to water for cross-sectorial, but also sector-specific, potentially some smaller version for SMEs, tackling water and marine resources in specific, specifically. So I think from that perspective, it's quite interesting to see also that we see this coherent framework developing. I'm not saying it's yet there, but between the taxonomy, well, water, we have an environmental objective on water, between the KPIs for financial institutions, the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, and then this new CSRD plus the standards. We do have a lot to play with, if I may say so, to actually get to a good level of corporate water transparency, which also should enable then investors to take better decisions. And maybe just also on Kathleen's point as regards to information being publicly available, the ultimate aim is also to have this regulated public sustainability statements in a machine readable format in the public domain, accessible on this European single access point, where I don't know if there has been yet an agreement, if there will be any pay schemes or any subscription schemes, but generally speaking, this I think everyone has understood that we need this information, and not only for investors but also for other stakeholders to work with.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Francesca. From your side, this sounds like a lot of work still for CDSB to do to guide between making the connection between investors and businesses.
Yeah, so like there is like, but I'm happy because I see a lot of developments around, like from US and also at the international level. So we hope also that the IFRS development will bring water at the top of the agenda. So I just wanted to underline a bit like what Kathleen was saying before, like as that water is key, let's say, in different environmental issues, also social, because as you mentioned at the beginning, like people need water for living, basically. So this is something, again, it's a kind of not really the first step when, like, from a company when preparing like information to be disclosed, but like in the future, what we would like to see in a report, like a report has to be concise, also, like not too long. So if you start having 20 pages of water, 20 pages on biodiversity, so it becomes complex also for investors to access it. So when a company really understood the topic of water and the implication for the business and so on, like integration between different topics can be also made. So like like risk assessment, for example, can be one. So you have like not climate, not water separately, but it's one. So like everything should be integrated. And like if a company really show the link between, for example, water and climate, that are like really like I'd say not easy, but among the links are emerging faster and in these days. So this is a good sign. So integrate water in the different domain, it's good, but we have to like explain that it's important. So yeah, I would that was the only part I wanted to add.
Thank you, and thank you. We're close to the end of this for me very interesting webinar panel discussion. I would like to ask every one of the speakers to, like, in a very short one-liner, what is the message you want to bring across? What's the main point for you for today to give along to the audience watching? Kathleen, if I may start with you.
Sure. I guess my main point would be to watch this space. There could be big things coming.
Thank you. Love that one. Miriam.
I would say we had 55% of EU companies that reduced or maintained water consumption already compared to previous years. We definitely want to see more. And I would encourage every company that hasn't yet started to take action on transparency to do that so we can start the journey on water sustainability.
Thank you. Francesca, please.
Yeah, really linked to what Miriam said, just start. So, I mean, there are a lot of, again, developments and things we're probably going to change in the future or becomes mandatory. So it's better to be ready and start from what you already have in terms of information, in terms of monitoring activities within a company or management activities. So because as you all mentioned before, information is already there, so at least some part of the information. So let's just start.
Wonderful. So, so I repeat what Kathleen said, watch this space. Water is connecting everything, and we have to raise awareness. We are on our way. Another one which reminded me of is like no water, no business. So we have to remember water is key in everything we do, and it's important to be open about it and to be mindful of how we use it. So yes, close off again, watch this space, and thank you very much for having been with us here. Thank you very much to my panelists. It was wonderful to have this conversation with you. Thank you, Cdsb, for arranging this, and looking forward to the next version in the webinar series. And thank you again. Stay healthy, stay safe.
Thanks, Bianca, for the moderation too.
Thank you. That's
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.